Welcome back to the Sweatfest of Tomo's tune-ups for 2025. As you saw in that previous episode, we had been cranking the engine for quite some time and we have got zero oil pressure. That's right, the middle of a donut. This is a concern, a big concern. Last thing you want to be doing after freshly rebuilding an engine is to go ahead and start it. It runs for 5, 10, 15, 20 seconds, no oil pressure, and then sucks up the oil and then creates damage. Now, I've been running this engine plugs out, full crank, for best part of probably 10 minutes. Obviously not in one go, that would just burn out the starter motor, but probably about 30 seconds at a time, on and off for the last 3 days, and zero oil pressure has been happening. So, what are we gonna do? On this episode, we're gonna be working out what the hell is going on and see if we can work out what's happened and hopefully get it running, or at least oil pressure, which then means we can keep assembling the engine. So I did have Sal and apprentice Kev come around. We did put the carburetor in. Turns out a set of HS4 twin SU carbies off an MGB do fit a classic Mini. However, you do need to make some modifications to suit. I did an episode over there not long ago of how to assemble it. Pretty straightforward. Although there are a couple of things that I either A, missed, or B, got wrong, because we've now got a pretty significant fuel leak from the inlet manifold. So between the manifold and the head, it is literally dripping fuel. Super annoying. So the guys at SU Medell in New South Wales are helping me out with that. I'm sending it to them tomorrow. They're going to look at the carby, work out what I need. I believe there's some offset bushes we need to run in there. We do need to change the needles, which then means I do need to get it tuned. I'm not really a fan of twin SUs, especially trying to tune them. I don't mind them. I think they're pretty cool, but yeah, more issues if you don't know what you're doing, which I don't, to be honest. So this episode, we're going to be working out how we need to get oil pressure. So like I said, you don't want to ever start an engine with the assumption that it's going to get oil pressure. You do want to crank it first. Easiest thing to do is take out all the plugs, disconnect the ignition system, the fuel system, and just crank it. Watch the oil pressure gauge go up. If you don't have an oil pressure gauge, you could remove the oil line that comes out of the block and goes directly to the oil filter housing. If you don't have an oil cooler, if you do, take it off where it comes out of the block and goes to the oil cooler, and then crank it until it gets to such point in which you get oil out of there. So I've got a glass container in the engine bay at the moment, which I'll show you guys in a second. So we're pretty much going to backfeed oil down through the oil pump. Essentially, I've got a little bit of Maury's heavy duty oil stabilizer. That's just going to help lubricate the oil pump. I did put some engine oil back down through the oil feed line that comes up directly from the block. So before we jump into it and show you what we were going to do, essentially you got to look at it as a really basic system. We have the oil strainer. It then travels up through the gearbox and block housing, which has an O-ring. Yes, I triple checked the video to make sure that was there before I fitted it, because it is very easily forgotten. It is quite a snug fit, so I remember took it out, cleaned it, put it in, sealed it, and then put the gasket over top, and then away we went. So there's that. At the back of the gearbox housing, we have an oil strainer, which I don't think we've spoken about yet on an episode of Minisport, but we can talk about that later. So it comes up through the oil strainer, so it's actually two strainers. And that's a magnetic trap as well. It then goes up through to the oil pump. So we have the oil pump and the oil pump gasket, and then it goes out. So essentially it can only really be a blocked pickup. The O-ring between the gearbox and the block. The strainer assembly, which I don't think so, because it's got all new gaskets through it. Could be, but you never know. The oil pump or the oil pump gasket, which I'm thinking that's maybe the case if this doesn't fix it. So without further ado, let's run the intro and let's get straight into it. All right, so here we are. I've got the fan going. It is blistering hot again down under, so welcome to Australia. All right, so I've got this glass container. As you can see, there's a little bit of oil down in there. Essentially what we're going to be doing is taking this line off. We're going to be feeding oil back down through there. I've then got a socket down under there attached to the crank. We're going to spin the rotation of the engine anti-clockwise, so counterclockwise, which is lefty-loosey. It's going to go backwards. This is then going to draw oil into the pump, which then hopefully will fill the pump full of oil, which then will create the vacuum, which then we can go and start it, and fingers crossed we get oil pressure. So long as we do, perfect. We can stop stressing and we can get on with this build. All right, so what we're going to be doing is grabbing this pipe. You do have to be careful if these braided sections are starting to fray, because it will cut your fingers open. Anyone that's had some braided components before, not your hair, but any sort of braided components, knows that when these fray, whew, do they give off one nasty bite. All right, so this is brand new. I bought this today from Repco. I was recommended it by a couple of different people. And this is a trick that my good mate Paul Jeffries taught me, is to backfeed this. It's a really good way to be able to get oil pressure and at least help it. So once this lid decides to come off, give me 30 seconds. 3 months later, finally get the lid off. So like we had on the Morris Minor where we had no oil pressure, this is obviously very different. That had a pump prime plug, which I didn't know about, and no one was able to tell me until we got stuck. And yeah, this is not the same. What's going on here? So although it doesn't have a cap in there, it's actually got one down under there. Great. All right, take 5. Let's give this a go. All right, so we're just going to feed it down in through here. So just nice and easy. And then you'll find, okay, so this stage that's completely full. We've got to do a little bit of MacGyver here. So I'm just going to wedge this bottle down here. And maybe you guys will be able to see, you can actually see a bubble coming up through there. We're going to fill it up, and then we're going to crank the engine backwards by hand, and then hopefully that's going to create the vacuum we need to be able to prime the pump. And remember, gravity will work its normal way of always starting at the highest point and then working down. Doesn't really matter too much how much of this we use, simply because we are going to drain the oil as well after about probably 300 miles. No, about 300 to 500 kilometers. So it's probably like 250 miles. It's probably thinner than the engine oil we're using, which is probably a bit of a blessing and helps to load it up inside the oil pump and help prime it. Oh, okay. Oh, I thought it took way more than that, but it clearly didn't. So yeah, just keep topping this up. And then if you have someone there with you, you can get them to crank the engine backwards whilst you do it, just so you can watch it go down. But this seems to be going fairly well, fairly smoothly, which is nice. All right, so now looks like we've topped it up almost to the point where it must be reaching the oil pump now. If that's the case, that's perfect. That's exactly where we want it. Essentially, we just want to make sure that the oil level remains pretty consistent, and that when we turn it, it actually drops. So long as it drops, we know that the oil pump is taking it. So come down to where the crank pulley is, put the socket in there, and we're just going to turn it backwards nice and easy. And we just want to inspect that oil pipe and just make sure that it takes oil all the way down there. All right, let's have a look at that. Let's see how much more it takes. So this will determine whether it's sucking it down through there and is getting ready to prime, or if it's not going down there whatsoever. All right, so I've wound the engine back quite a lot. I reckon probably 30 plus revolutions. So that's revolution of the crankshaft. So remember, 2 to 1, crank to cam. So now what we're going to do is just get that line. That's just going to go directly in there. You will lose a little bit of oil as you go to start it. You'll notice it'll start to drip. I'll just reposition the camera. Essentially, you're going to lose a little bit of oil down in here because there's obviously going to be oil residue inside that pipe. So everything's clear. Nothing's going to touch. Moment of truth. Let's give this a go, see if we can get some oil pressure. So that's normal. There we go. Fabulous. We now have oil pressure. Let's reconnect that and check the gauge. All right, so I just reconnected that pipe. I'm just going to retension that fitting. I did lose a little bit, obviously as I turned the pipe up its right way in gravity, it did lose a bit of oil, but an oil spill of this sort of magnitude, I guess, at the moment is the least of my worries. If I got to spend a bit of extra money to detail the car to get it clean, that's a much better answer than having to spend another several $1,000s rebuilding the engine because it doesn't have oil pressure. So this oil leak at the moment, Chris, I'm sorry mate, I will clean that up at the moment. Now let's go and start it, or at least try and get some oil pressure in this thing. All good episodes, I'm filming at night. There's our oil pressure gauge. Let's do it. What do you know? We now have oil pressure. Yeah, buddy. What a relief that was. I was thinking, man, I was gonna have to pull this thing back apart. And to be honest, it's not that hard to be able to do it. All you gotta really do is take off this engine mount, take off the wok, the clutch arm, the flywheel, clutch assembly, transfer case housing, starter motor, pull the transfer case housing off, and then pull the oil pump out and have a look. But we ended up getting oil pressure. It did drop off there at the end, but I think it's just because I'm full cranking the battery, and I did for probably 30 seconds or more. So I'll give it a little bit longer to retest it, but that's how you check oil pressure in an engine prior to starting it. As I said, if you don't have an oil pressure gauge, you can just buy one from your local Super Cheap Auto or Burson's. I believe Minisport probably even sell them as well. If you don't have a mechanical gauge, you can buy an electronic gauge, or alternatively just get a screw-in one that just goes directly in there. A lot of them are the exact same thread, so I think it's a 1/8 BSP, I think, from memory. If not, just take off an oil line and just crank it till you see oil coming out, and consistent oil. It might just splitter and splatter for a little bit. So long as you have a consistent stream of oil, you're pretty well fine, and there's no issues there whatsoever. But yeah, that's it. I'm gonna keep assembling this thing to the best of my ability, see if I can get this thing back together to a point where we are pretty much just ready to bolt the carbies on. So wish me luck. See you on the next episode when we fire this thing up on Tomo's Tune-Ups.